British media are reporting that for the first time, Ukraine has fired the UK-supplied Storm Shadow missiles into Russia. Neither Ukraine nor Britain have confirmed those reports, which say 12 of the missiles were fired into Kursk, a border region partially held by Ukrainian forces. Storm Shadows are long-range cruise missiles developed jointly by the UK and France. They're launched from fighter jets and have a range of more than 250 kilometers. And for more on this, we're joined now by military analyst Simon Diggins. He's also a former British Army officer. Simon, good to see you. Welcome to the program. Now, first ATACMS and now reportedly Storm Shadow missiles. How much of a difference will these weapons likely make to Ukraine's war effort?
They will make a difference, but I think we need to be careful to assume they are necessarily going to transform Ukraine's war effort. What it does enable them to do is to attack targets within Russia itself. Now, certainly Storm Shadow and the French version Scalp has been used against Russian targets in occupied territories, and also that includes, for example, the area of Crimea, which Russia occupied in 2014. But a lot of the Russian weapon systems, particularly their aircraft and their missile launchers, have been based in Russia itself, and that's those that have been used against Ukraine. Now, with these weapon systems, ATACMS, the US system, and Storm Shadow Scalp, the British and French system, Ukraine can now attack those systems before they're launched at Ukraine. So they will make a difference, and they'll force Russia, for example, to have to redeploy some of its air defences in order to counter them. So they are important, but they're not necessarily going to transform the overall balance of forces, if you like, the calculus of forces in this campaign.
Now, for the non-military analysts among us, how do Storm Shadows compare to the longer-range missiles provided by the U.S.?
So the two slightly different missile systems. So the US system, the ATACMS system, is basically a ballistic missile. So it fires up into the upper atmosphere and then lands directly on the target. Storm Shadow and Scalp are what they call cruise missiles, and they are just literally beneath this fly ground hugging just beneath the speed of sound, and then just before they hit their target, they fly up into the air in a rather strange maneuver called a bunt, and then land on the target itself. So they're different in terms of how they operate. The really effective way to use them is to use both together. So an ATACMS missile being fired up into the air, and then the cruise missile, both flying very differently. And the defenders then got an option about, or a problem, or dilemma, if you like, about which one they deal with first and how they deal with it, because you need a different side defense mechanism to deal with one, to deal with the other. So they are going to make a difference. They are important extras, if you like, arrows in the armory of Ukraine. And I think that's key. But they won't necessarily transform, as I said before, the overall war effort. They will make life much harder for the Russians.
Yeah. Germany, another one of Ukraine's key allies, has been reserved, to put it mildly, about the prospect of its weapons being used within Russia. Do you think that is likely to change now?
Well, I wonder whether, if you like, the psychological barrier of European powers providing weapons that can now be used directly inside Russia may help Germany to move to that decision. Where you could have argued perhaps when it was only just the US with the ATACMS missile, that's just the US doing their thing. But now basically the French and the British have basically said you can use our weapons against Russian targets, very specific Russian targets, but still Russian targets inside Russia itself. So maybe that psychological barrier will come down. Taurus is an important additional weapon, and I know the Ukrainians are very keen to have it, not least of which because it gives them the opportunity to hit targets in and around the Moscow region, where a lot of the strategic forces that Russia has have been held from that. So I can see exactly why President Zelensky will want them, not just for the current battle, but if you recall about 3 to 4 weeks ago, he was kind of summoned to Washington and asked to give his victory plan. And one of the things he asked for was a sub-nuclear strategic deterrent. And what he meant by that, we understand, is this combination of missiles that would be sufficient once there is some form of ceasefire, however ugly and however difficult that it's going to be. Once there is that kind of ceasefire, a sufficiently powerful mix of weapons to deter Russia from conducting another operation against Ukraine in the future. So I think Taurus is very much seen as an important weapon in that mix. And I suspect that the pressure will therefore be on Chancellor Scholz and the German government to provide Ukraine with that over the next weeks or months.
Yeah. The Biden administration has also given Kyiv the go-ahead to use American anti-personnel landmines. Let's listen to the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who said that is a positive step.
They're fabricating their own anti-personnel landmines right now. The landmines that we would look to provide them would be landmines that are not persistent. You know, we can control when they would self-activate, self-detonate, and that makes it far more safer eventually than the things that they are creating on their own.
Now, Simon, this is an interesting one because Ukraine is a signatory to the mine ban treaty, while the U.S. and Russia are not. How do you think Kyiv will justify using these U.S.-supplied anti-personnel landmines?
I think there is an argument it needs to put forward, because I think a lot of people who are very supportive of Ukraine nonetheless will be worried about the long-term effects of anti-personnel mines, and also effectively the breach in their use by a signatory country to them. The argument will be around the threat that Russia poses, and particularly the need to create a sort of strong defensive belt that Russia couldn't penetrate in the future. Perhaps by way of comparison, though they're not using mines, we can look at what the Poles are doing. The Poles are now looking to build effectively a sort of strong defensive belt along their entire eastern border with Belarus and bits of Russia, basically to slow down and to channel them from there. And I think what President Zelensky would want to do would be use anti-personnel mines in much the same way. We do know, for example, at the moment, that a lot of the attacks that the Russians are putting in against the Ukrainians are kind of human wave type attack, and clearly anti-personnel mines will have not only a casualty effect on them, but psychologically as well. Mines are a very interesting weapon system. They are often designed to wound rather than to kill. But they have a real sort of psychological effect on infantrymen. I was an infantryman for 30 years because you can't trust the ground on which you stand. And I think that has a clear psychological effect on a particular enemy. So I can see the military argument for them, but there's also a kind of psychological barrier for the rest of the world in terms of support for Zelensky and support for their defense. And it may make a lot of people just a little bit queasy about that support in the future.
Those military analysts, Simon Diggins, thank you so much for your time and all those insights.
My pleasure.